it's great being back at LA City Historical Society. I was past president for about 4 years as well. But you know, time goes on so quickly, as we all know it, don't we? And I've been one of the founders of Hollywood Heritage. We run the Hollywood Heritage Museum across from the Hollywood Bowl. I was one of the founders of the Culver City Historical Society, Beverly Hills Historical Society, and involved with history all through the San Fernando Valley. Actually, Los Angeles Regional. How about that? And that is my problem, is that I started in research at the movie studios, but I grew up as a part of the history of Los Angeles. Was born at Queen of Angels Hospital in Echo Park, which is now the Dream Center. Many of you know it. My father came from Chicago after the war, young doctor, studied over at General Hospital. Many of you know what that is. And near Lincoln Park, of course. And I grew up in San Fernando Valley for the first 3 years of my life. And then my father felt it was too hot there, so he came back over the side of the hill. And we lived in the Fairfax district right across from CBS. And, you know, I found a picture of myself about, I think I was 3 years old when we moved over there. And I'm standing next to an early television with the screen is, you know, was that big. And so, wow. So I've been watching TV since I was 3. I remember Engineer Bill, Sheriff John, you know, there's so many other shows. So I grew up in the culture of Hollywood, LA, and my father, being a doctor, started to get patients that were in the film and TV industry. And I met historical figures like for example, Colonel Tim McCoy. You might not know who that is, but he was very important in the early days of the film industry and bringing in the Native American tribes into the films because he spoke the language and sign language. And met him, and I started to meet others in the film industry, and ended up being this little kid extra actor in that TV show called Rin Tin Tin, you might remember. And it was shot over at Corriganville in Simi Valley. And we're talking in the early 50s now. And then finally, I met Ray Crash Corrigan, who had his ranch out there, and he opened up the western town to the public. Many of you might remember going out to Corriganville in the 50s, early 60s. And I was part of the stunt. I was a stunt kid out there. And then just by chance, being in Hollywood, Walt Disney's daughter, one of his daughters moved in next door. Got to meet him. And I ended up being in Spin and Marty, that TV show, and all of this. But this goes beyond that. My mother, I don't know why, already was dressing me as an urban cowboy kid. And they sent me to a horse camp out in Newhall, where I learned how to ride a horse at 6 years old, 7 years old. And later on, Ojai Valley School, where I learned there to ride. So it's just part of the culture of Los Angeles and the West, being in the film and TV industry, being on those back lots, those ranches. You know, the Disney Ranch out there in Placerita Canyon, and then in Hollywood itself. My uncle Sam was Sam Wanamaker. He came back from Europe to direct pilots. He even appeared in Twilight Zone, Outer Limits. He directed some TV shows. I went there. He invited me to go there, and I was walking around these back lots and soaking in the history of the film industry and the MGM lot and RTO Pathé lot, which is the Culver Studio lot, and Universal, and just everywhere. I'm telling you, this little kid, Mark, was getting just immersed in this culture of Hollywood. And then to end what I'm telling you right now, there's no ending to what I have to say, but I ended up working in the research libraries at the studios. And in the research libraries, we did picture research. We had these wonderful libraries with every subject under the sun. And of course, I was drawn to the files of Los Angeles history and history of everything relating to Los Angeles history. And that I became a film historian and a city historian, basically because I saved the Columbia photograph collection, almost 1 million photographs on the history of Columbia Studios. It was being thrown away in 1970. And I cataloged it and got to learn about locations around the city. And you see how this all started. Now I'm just giving you just a quick basic history of myself and how I actually got into all this. But as time went on, I'm just fascinated with all the little technical things and all the ancillary history of Los Angeles. I'm fascinated with the Rancho period leading into the missions. Remember, in school, we used to learn about what the mission, who the missions were, how they were started, who did it, and all of this, and how that developed into the ranches period in the later 19th century, leading into the beginning of Los Angeles as a city itself, which was a slow going. But that's why I kind of specialize now, as you heard now, all these years. So my specialty is real history, right? As I was just telling you, and how I fit into it, and the film history, and how that fits into it, and how it's intertwined. So when I was approached by the Los Angeles Railroad Heritage Foundation, Joe Lesser, he said, I want a book on trains and trolleys in Hollywood and studios and all this, because I became a studio expert on where they were located and what they did. So I wrote him this manuscript, and he said, no, no, no. I don't need to know the number of the train, the locomotive, and where it was from and what film it was in. I want the beginnings of the film industry at the very beginning, thank you, and how it developed into Los Angeles. So in other words, the film industry, the transportation history, and the history of Los Angeles all intertwining. God, it took me 2 years to figure out how to do this book. And let's just start now. Let's do the next picture. Now, I wanted to start in the book in the leaves of the book itself, showing you the poster art, the publicity, and publicity really is at the heart of all of this. It's at the heart of bringing tourism to Los Angeles area. Helen Hunt Jackson, remember she did her story Ramona, and the whole idea of Ramona is to is about anti-racism, about anti-racism relating to Native Americans and Spanish people and everything. And she got her inspiration at the Rancho Camulos, for example, which is on Highway 126, on the way to Ventura near Magic Mountain. It's all still there, by the way. I urge all of you, if you haven't already, to visit the wonderful existing ranchos today, the Workman Temple, the Rancho Camulos, and the Pico's brother's house, and Dominguez Hills. And my gosh, there's such history of those early days still existing. So when the film industry came here, they utilized, see these titles, Wyoming Mail, this early Kalem film here on the left, and Tom Mix, my own pal, utilizing not only the trains and trolleys of that was there at the time, we're talking in the early days, but I named my archives called the Bison Archives, and it's named after the second film company to come out to California in 1909. And they came out here utilizing real Native Americans. So Princess Redwing and James Youngdeer were the first to actually come out here who were real Native Americans to be in films. And it was the Bison Company. They first made them in New Jersey, but they had to come to the real West, right? And that's part of the whole thing with Helen Hunt Jackson. Many people started coming when the trains started to come out here after 1869 and in the 1870s. Tourism started already, and they were starting to come to LA, utilizing the trains. And so the publicity, as I was trying to explain, all it was intertwined. So the Los Angeles Railroad Heritage Foundation, I'll let you know when the next one comes up. When they did another book called the El Camino Real book. And what that book is, you have to get it on eBay now. It's out of print. It's a wonderful book all about the railroads bringing tourism to Los Angeles and exploiting the early California history of the missions, the El Camino Real, of course, and the bells that were instituted by by the different historical groups, you know, those wonderful mission bells that you see everywhere. And all of this is into with Charles Lummis was one of the main people trying to get this going, to get the tourism to come. So get this, the Selig Polyscope Company. You can do the next slide. I'll talk over this one a little bit. The Selig Polyscope Company is the first company to come to Los Angeles. They came early on, 1903 at first, but then they came out to do the first dramatic film, The Heart of a Race Tout, in 1908, 1909. And they are the ones that set up the first studio in downtown Los Angeles, which is in my book, and I talk about it, in Edendale. So what I'm trying to explain is that I'm trying to link the publicity of getting tourism to come to Los Angeles. They all use the railroads, the trolley cars. When the studios first came out, as I just said, the Selig Polyscope, Mr. Selig met with Charles Lummis, and they devised a permit system to pay money for a permit to shoot at missions, for example, or at existing rancho sites. And the money for the permit was the beginning of raising money for the restoration of the missions. So the film industry in its earliest days, the dawn of filmmaking in California, was helping to restore the history of California. You see, this is, I mean, mind-blowing to me. Let's do the next slide, please. Now here's Hollywood in 1910. I mean, you can see it here. It's like nothing was there in Los Angeles. It was all, as you all know by now, I mean, agricultural. But what you're looking at here is on the left, you see some buildings there. That's Hollywood High School. And I'm sorry, in the middle, I mean, top middle is Hollywood High School. That little building there with a little dome on top. And on the left is the Hollywood Hotel. And right in the foreground is one of the early houses of Hollywood in the kind of the Spanish mission style, quote, Hollywood architecture. That's at Orange and Franklin Avenue. That is today the American Cinematographer Union. And you see those little two houses right in the middle of the picture, right under the Hollywood High School. That's where the Grauman's Chinese Theater is today. So you see the dramatic change in Hollywood is amazing, isn't it? Next. Now let's start at the beginning. Now, Joe Lesser wanted me to talk about motion. What is motion? Motion pictures, right? When you think of it, when you kind of break it down and analyze it, well, this goes back to 1872, when Leland Stanford, governor of California at that time, and one of the people that brought in the railroads with Huntington and the others, the meeting of the rails, remember, is in 1869. That's in Utah. And when they met the rails, that was the Southern Pacific and the Central Pacific. That was the beginning of linking the two sides of the continent together. And but in 1872, at this time, a bet was made with Leland Stanford, with some of his rancho friends, that a horse's hooves leave the ground completely, and the horse is flying in the air. Well, most of those ranchers said that's impossible. A horse can't fly. So, but Leland Stanford knew this. He saw it, and he had to prove it. So we got this guy, Ed Weird. Yes, his name was Ed Weird because he was weird. He was a wonderful photographer from England, but he ended up being a recluse up in the, there's a whole story about him, which we won't go into now, but he became a recluse up in the Sierra Mountains taking pictures. He brought him down, Leland Stanford brought him down and told him that he'd like to photograph the horse running and see if the horse's hooves. So you can see in these frames here, you can see the top of the one from third from the left. On the top one, you can see the horse's hooves is clearly off the ground. The horse is flying. So Muybridge started to do these frames, and he put tripwires in, and he couldn't get it. So guess what? Already we have the beginning of railroading, right? So Leland Stanford brought in an electrical engineer from the railroad to put in electrical tripping wires in. And guess what? It worked. It worked. That it's just amazing that you can see it happening. There it is. There's movement. So so next slide. So what he did was, that's Muybridge. He made a he came up with this disc, and he inlaid his little frames. These are birds flying on this particular one. And he inlaid the frames of the horse all around the disc. And then when he turned the disc, the horse is moving pictures. And he called it the zopraxiscope, as you can see here. Next. Now, finally, this is really early on. This is about 1898. They already, when the cameras were being developed would you believe cameras were being developed all around the world at this time? And they didn't know each other, and there was no telephones or anything they could really talk to each other. It's just that in England, a man named Paul was developing a camera. In France, the Lumiere brothers and the Gaumont and all these people were developing cameras. Edison, of course, on our side. And then shortly after, the biograph camera and the other cameras were being developed. So this is a biograph camera, a small one. And that's Billy Bitzer there. He became a D.W. Griffith's cameraman. But here he is on the front of a locomotive, one of the earliest tracking shots. So when you're in the theater, you see the train coming into the station, and the train is coming closer and closer, and people are hiding and cowering under their seats because they never witnessed motion pictures before. And this is an amazing thing for the end of the 19th century, bringing in the 20th century of motion pictures, utilizing transportation, of course, which moves. Pretty obvious, isn't it? Next. The first narrative film, that means a drama, 1903, The Great Train Robbery, shot in New Jersey. But look at this. This is actually using railroads as part of the character of the film. And these are the robbers there. And one of these robbers was Bronco Billy Anderson, later years, Max Aronson, who formed the S&A Film Company. And he became Bronco Billy Anderson, the first cowboy in movies. And later on, not 1903, a little later on, but not much later on. Next. So all of this is going on the East Coast, pretty much. But early on, the Selig Polyscope Company, as I explained, they came out here 1903 at first. Edison came out 1898. I should have preceded that with Edison. Edison came out and shot Spring Street in 1898. That film exists, and the stills exist of that. It's amazing. So, but what did they come out here for? Most people think that because Thomas Edison owned the patents to all the cameras and all, well, he did. But most of these film companies came out for two major reasons. The first reason is that the weather out here is conducive to filmmaking. The sun. They don't have really the hurricanes, the rain. We have droughts all the time. It's always, you can shoot almost all year round. For a second point is that the land everywhere is the real West. And people expected some authenticity in their films. And it's the real West that they're coming to see. So in this picture I put here, this shot in the 1930s. But look, here is a railroad being photographed by these the film company in the real West. That's Chatsworth, by the way, that you're looking at. Next. Now, they came up with wonderful cartoons. This is a fantastic cartoon about the film industry coming west, of course, utilizing railroads, of course. What else? They're going to fly out? No, they didn't have planes yet, really, that could take anybody. And it's the damn weather. It's the weather that was driving the film people on the East Coast crazy. Now, in New York, the weather was always, they couldn't count on the weather, I'll put it that way, in New York State, New York City. So they went down to Florida, and they were shooting down in Florida for quite a while. And they also went over to Cuba as well. But there's always problems with the weather in the southwest of the United States. I mean, with not just hurricanes, but humidity, rain. It was too hot, too bright. There's always something going on, and that's what's starting them coming out with the Selig Company. The Bison Company came out for the same reasons, for the being in the real West, of cheap land, labor, and of course away from the patents companies. And so I love this cartoon here. I can't read it for you right now, but it is the cutest thing you ever saw. Next. So there it is. There's Hollywood, 1896. View from Laughlin Park, which is Los Feliz area, to the Cahuenga Valley, to Hollywood Hills. And the Cahuenga Valley, of course, is right at the mouth of Cahuenga Boulevard. Remember, you know, the Cahuenga Pass, of course. And it was agricultural at this time. And in 1898, when Edison came out, and in 1903, when Selig came out, they were filming really more or less tourist films, you know, to show what it looked like and to bring people out here and to enjoy the sun and the beach. That's why Santa Monica, early on, in the late 19th century, already started to boast tourism coming to its beaches. And the Arcadia Hotel, which was built there, which burned a few times, which is right where the where you go down the ramp into the Santa Monica Pier. That was all important. And the Marquez Beach House, which is right near Santa Monica Canyon, all of that was for beachgoers and mostly tourists. Next. Now, when Universal opened in 1915, I have to explain about Universal real quick. I did a whole book on it with a friend of mine. Basically, Universal, when they came out here in 1912. That's when they formed an amalgamation of little tiny independent companies who were already in Los Angeles and in Hollywood. And they needed a ranch because remember, they're shooting Westerns. Sure, they shot other films, yeah, but most everything was Westerns in the early days. That was the big deal. And they leased the Providencia Rancho, which is today Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills, right across from Warner Brothers. That was the Providencia, part of the Providencia Rancho, the ex-mission lands, of course, when the mission ceased to exist after a while, and all these lands were spread out. And that was the real West. And the Bison Film Company was one of the first to use it. And there was a famous story, like a saying, that in the 20s, a Poverty Row company is known as a company, an independent company, had no money. So a producer came up to the head of the company at Poverty Row, which was Gower and Sunset, by the way, and Beechwood Drive, right around there, where Columbia Studios later became. And the guy said, we got to go out to the desert. Or, you know, we need some rocks and we need like a cave and all this kind of thing. And a good place to go was up to Mojave. I know we have a Mojave person that I just noticed in the chat, because Mojave and the Owens Valley has a lot to do with all the film industry in these early days and the railroads. I'll get to that in a few minutes. But he said, we need to go out and get these shots. But the producer said, no. Go to Griffith Park. A rock is a rock, a tree is a tree, shoot it there. Oh my gosh, what a practical way of putting it, right? Next. So when Universal came out, they advertised coming out to California. And you saw in that shot with the big banner on the front of the train there. Now, Universal didn't stay long at the Providencia Rancho because it was not for sale. They wanted to buy a ranch where they would actually relocate their actual studio at the ranch. So they had to move. So in 1914, before that, excuse me, 1913, they actually formed Universal City. They actually used that term as we still know it today. And actually the city, really the legal entity was North Hollywood, but publicity, right? Universal City, wow. And they had to have officers of the city. You have to have a mayor, you know, and they have to have a police chief and, you know, the usual thing. So the Cochran brothers, I did a whole book on the history of Universal. And the Cochrans and the Lemleys and the Stearns are the ones that formed Universal. And the Cochrans were publicity people from the East Coast. So what did they think they'd do? They formed this city and they would publicize this city that these films are being made at Universal City in Los Angeles. And they started to utilize this publicity and they needed a mayor, right? So they had an election at Universal City. and they had all the boats went to Lois Weber, who was a famous filmmaker, director in her day, early one. She's one of the early pioneer female directors. And she was the first mayor of Universal City in 1913. But let me bring you across a little more of real history, which flabbergasted me. There was an opera singer, Laura Oakley, and Laura was an actress, opera singer at Universal in those days. She was a very big woman, tall woman, because she was an opera singer, right? They had no microphones in those days. They would really sing. But she was also an equestrian, and she also was very interested in anything that would give her like a different kind of view of life. And so they nominated her to be the first police chief of Universal. Everybody laughed. Oh, the opera singer is going to be a police chief. Well, you know what? Her granddaughter contacted me many years ago because I'm officially with the LA County Museum. And she said, I have her uniform, I have her badges, I have her certificates, graduating from LAPD, LA County Sheriff. What? She really was a sheriff, really was a police chief. And what was her duty? Because the Los Angeles River in those days that was running right by Universal there was a slum place. Dead bodies were floating in there. All kinds of indigent people were living in there. And it was a problem. It was dangerous. They had to have a horse patrol running through there with LA County Sheriff and LAPD. She was the head of it. So I found out later that Alice Stebbins Wells, she's the first police woman in the country in the 19th century, trained her. And Alice Stebbins Wells actually appeared in some films as well in these early days. So you see how real history just intermingles with the film history and the development of Los Angeles, leading to this book. So this shot you're looking at right now, you see the Biograph studio. Biograph came out of New York, early 1910 with D.W. Griffith. And this is what they were using, actual railway car house at Pico and Georgia Street in downtown Los Angeles. So these buildings you see behind there are all sheds and everything for storing railroad equipment where they made these first films. Next. Now the Pacific Electric, of course, very important in all of this. This is the Vitagraph company, came from Brooklyn, and that's Joe Rock there in the middle. I knew Joe, he came from Vitagraph, Brooklyn. He was a stunt actor, comedian, and he later became a director. And immediately, trolley cars and streetcars were being used in downtown LA for the film companies for several reasons. First of all, they needed it to get around. Look, not everybody had a car, right? Only a few people had cars. So everybody rode here on these trolley cars to the locations of where they were going to be filming, or they lived in hotels or in little bungalows or in apartments, and the workers went to the studios taking these trolley cars. And remember, I don't even have to remind many of you are historians of LA, is that it was the mecca of transportation. The P&E, the Pacific Electric, is not just crisscrossed Los Angeles, there was a web. So wherever you lived, you could always get on a trolley car easily and travel anywhere in the red cars and the yellow cars. So the film industry immediately started using them for their transportation purposes. When Cecil B. DeMille in Hollywood, 1913, made The Squaw Man, his first feature film made in Hollywood, they were shooting it mostly in the valley. They went to Sun Valley. It was called Roscoe, California in those days. It was where the river came down from the the Tujunga River came down and left beds of gravel there, where the Hanson Dam is today. So those are all gravel pits, gravel quarries. They're still there. You don't see them, but they're there. So DeMille hired a railroad there, the Quarry Railroad, and they shot a lot of the squaw man there. So you understand that these trolley cars brought you to locations. They use the trains in their films. They use them for equipment. It's just, when you delve into this subject, it is amazing. Next. Now you have to listen to my podcast. I have new podcasts coming out because part of my career was to be a technical advisor on films and TV shows. And the last film I worked on was Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. You must see it for the accuracy of recreating a Hollywood, Los Angeles in the late 1960s, which I grew up in. I was immersed in this. And many of these locations, of course, being used that were shown all around the world. So people in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood would see Hollywood Boulevard, 1968, Larry Edmunds' bookshop, which we repainted in its original place. It had moved. And the Spawn Movie Ranch, where the Manson family was hiding out. I happened to have been at the Spawn Movie Ranch. I knew at the time. I was a musician in those days. I didn't know Manson, but I knew Bobby Beausoleil, who was one of Manson's killers, who was actually in my band. He was a rhythm guitarist. He was a wonderful, kind, sweet guy with long hair, beautiful white dog, nice disposition, but I didn't know he was a manic depressive on medication. And that's how Manson twisted people around. See, I was involved in this, involved with the film industry. In the film, it's about Lancer, a TV series, Western series. DiCaprio plays the star of it. Just so happens my uncle Sam Wanamaker directed the first pilot of it. I was there on that set that DiCaprio was on. Of course, Tarantino knew all this, but you see how my own real history is intertwined in the film industry. So you see, that's why I'm so enthusiastic about all this. Now that's Ruth Rowland you're seeing in that shot there. My podcast, which I was trying to tell you about, go online. All you have to do is just Google Marc Wanamaker, History of Hollywood podcast. And one of them, I think the latest one, is Pioneering Action Female Heroes of the Silent Film Era, in which they did their own stunts and they were the stars of their own series. Just like now, the Wonder Woman and all this stuff now. Ruth Rowland was Wonder Woman of her day. We're talking 1914, 1915. Here she is on top of a train. Look at the camera crew hanging on there. I don't know how they must have been wired on there. But this is a moving train and she would end up jumping off. Yeah, jumping off. And she better have gotten, hit that net they had there for her. Otherwise, she'd be dead. But it shows you the locations, the beginnings of the film industry in Hollywood, the studios, the stunts, the people. It's just the horses, the West out here is a whole nother thing I'm getting into. Next. Oh, this is the shot I was telling you about. This shot is actually 1898. And that's Spring Street. And this is an actual still from the film that Edison made. It's called Spring Street, 1898, Los Angeles. And the film exists. But look carefully at the picture, 1898, right? Trolley cars, streetcars, and wagons, horses, buckboards, carriages, stagecoaches. This was our transportation system. And already in the early days, the film industry was capturing this. And the movement of it fascinated people to see all of this on a screen moving. They saw it in real life their whole life, but they're seeing it on a screen for the first time. It's mind-blowing to people at that time. It's like today's special effects that we see today with IMAX and Introvision and all these different forms of entertainment that trying to keep us interested in the film industry. Next. Now, what the movies needed was movement. They needed, of course, the locations. They used these transportation to go from one location to another. And they went to these historic places and they made the films there. The Selig Company, when they made the deal with Lummis, made their first films at the missions, at San Gabriel Mission, San Fernando Mission. And Hobart Bosworth was one of the earliest film actors. one of the first stage actors actually acted films. Started with the Selig Polyscope Company in 1909. And I have pictures of him as a don, as a don of a rancho visiting a mission on his horse in beautiful costuming of the rancho period. And then he played a padre at San Gabriel Mission. I have him walking up the famous steps leading up to the mission in 1909. So, I mean, this is a fascination. Next. And I'm going to go on more about this later, but all the train stations that were here, the 19th century train stations and the later train stations that were built were all utilized by the film industry. I put this slide in just to show you in 1950, they're using the Pasadena Santa Fe station, which is a nice restaurant today, which I usually eat in. Next. Now, this is how it all happened. Location, location, location. Since the early days, the Selig Polyscope Company, the Bison Company, and these early companies that came following, like the Lasky Feature Plate Company of DeMille, and then a million other ones, they all had started with setting up a location department at the studio. What does that mean? They would send photographers out, literally fanned out all over the West, not just Los Angeles, the whole West, and shoot every historical place they could think of, every street, every building, farms, ranches, natural beauty, of like Vasquez Rocks, for example, and Agua. I mean, these natural formations. Why? Because they would bring the photographs back to the studio, and a guy like this one that you're seeing right here, taken in the 30s, he's looking actually at the Glendale airfield in Glendale, which is, by the way, was restored by Disney. And I visited recently. It's beautiful and done, but that was the major airport in Glendale at the time, the Grand Central Airport. That's what it is. And look, that's actually a photograph. He's actually looking there of it. Next. Now, here's another guy. He's looking here at Paramount, 1940. He's looking at actual like landscaping, not just buildings like the other guy was. And they needed beautiful landscapes. And that's what I'm going to get to now is I'm involved with the Lone Pine Film Festival, and I'm one of the historians of the Owens Valley relating to films. And all the towns from Bishop, Independence, Lone Pine, and all the way over to Kernville, where all the films were made. And why were they made there? If you go to Lone Pine, just look up Lone Pine, look it up, and you'll see the Alabama Hills and Mount Whitney behind it. It is surreal. It is incredible. You have to look up the Alabama Hills. And of course, Mount Whitney was known and tourists were coming. So in 1909, the Chamber of Commerce of Los Angeles and other chambers all were trying to get tourism, people to come to Los Angeles. So the film industry consulted with them. So the Bison Film Company in 1909 needed this weird background of the Alabama Hills. And they told, you can get over there now easily by train. You could take the train from downtown LA and you'd change at Mojave, which is the fork at Mojave, and you take it up 395, where the 395 goes into the Owens Valley, and you take the train up there because at that time, William Mulholland, as we all know, was developing different water systems to come down to Los Angeles, like the aqueduct. And to this day, LADWP, has taken over the whole Owens Valley, and there's big controversy to this day about it all. But they could take the train up to Keeler. Keeler was a mining town, and the Owens Lake was there with a boat on it, and they could go straight to Lone Pine, which was the jumping off point for the Alabama Hills. So for years and years, everyone thought in the Owens Valley that this Roscoe Arbuckle film was the first film made in the Owens Valley, but no, it was a Bison film. It was Iona, the White Squaw, was made there in 1909, and in Moving Picture World, they actually showed a picture of the cast and crew sitting on the Keeler stagecoach in front of the Lone Pine train station. Wow. I wrote a whole article about it in the Lone Pine Film Festival last year. Next. Now, these locations, of course, we're utilizing railroad-related locations. This is the Santa Susana Tunnel on Southern Pacific Line through Chatsworth, Simi Valley. Still there, used by Universal's Abbott Costello, as you see here in the Keystone Cops film, 1954. Now, right next to this tunnel is Corriganville. Remember, I told you I was a stunt kid at Corriganville, which is Ray Crash Corrigan's ranch. Literally, right to the left of the picture is the ranch. Next. Now, the Chatsworth Station. This is a 19th century style. Now, you'll see this all over in your old pictures of LA train stations. They all look alike. Why? Because the Southern Pacific, Union Pacific, they all used an architect in the 19th century to, in other words, they had blueprints for this style of station. So there were hundreds of these stations. They all look alike. The only way you can tell them apart is usually there's a sign that says Chatsworth on it. Next. This is the LeGrand Station in downtown LA. The beautiful LeGrand Station in its unusual style, which was this mission. It wasn't mission. It was I forgot the style of it, but it was the most unusual style station. There was also the LA Metropolitan Station right nearby, and the Southern Pacific Station, which this was. So here we have Harold Lloyd actually filming there in 1932, because the background is so wonderful of these beautiful stations that they used to have. Next. This is the old Pasadena station. It was a brick station. And 1936, they were shortly thereafter. Remember that other shot I've showed you, Pasadena station? That's the more near, that was the newer station. This is the old station. And they made a ton of films at this old Pasadena station. Next. And I love this. A lot of people love this shot. It's Harry Langdon at the Santa Fe La Grande Railroad Station. But it shows all the baggage. So in other words, they literally went over there and shot there while business is going on. Now, permits had to be eventually secured because the Max Sennett Company, Keystone Cop people, they would go around anywhere. So if there was a fire somewhere, they would get there before the fire department, shoot as many shots as they could while the building was burning, and get out before the fire and the police arrived. This is true. It actually happened like this until finally the police and fire went to the city hall and said, they can't just do this. You can't just let them run around crazy like this. And so you had to get permits. But look, here this film is utilizing the real station, the real baggage. Of course, the baggage handler up there is an actor, but still you get the idea that these films were shown all around the world, and people started to see what Los Angeles looked like little by little over the years. And to this day, actually. Next. Of course, our wonderful new Union Passenger Terminal, Union Station, 1939, used by all the studios. But interestingly enough, when this opened, Cecil B. DeMille was premiering his film Union Station, 1939. So what did they do? They got the city fathers together, got all the railroad companies together, and they had the big opening in which they had parades, they had plays, they had musicals, they had all kinds of things going on, and they paraded down Alameda Street one of the early trains from the meeting of the rails, the 1869, and then they had a next train from the 1880s. They had another locomotive from the 1900s, another one from the 1920s, and a modern one from the 1930s. All parading together to show you the development of the transportation system, the railroads, and of course, the movie industry, in which the stars of Union Pacific and DeMille himself were there hobnobbing with the head of the Union Pacific, head of Central Pacific, etc. Next. Now, this is Hollywood. This happens to be, I think it's Wilcox, it's Cahuenga and Hollywood Boulevard. At that time, it was called Prospect Avenue, Hollywood Boulevard. But you see these trolleys, they were so fantastic. I mean, they were everywhere. You could just hop on, and it was very cheap too in those days. So these studios, when they first came out here, they thought, why not position our studios on trolley lines for transportation purposes? And that's what they did. Next. So this is what I was telling you. This is the very first studio in Los Angeles. This was the Selig Polyscope Company on Olive Street between 7th and 8th in 1908. And they are actually in a drying yard of the Sing Ki Laundry, a Chinese laundry. And while I was president of the LA City Historical Society, we met at the Piper Center, which is the LA Records Department there. And I decided to go look up the business records of the Sing Ki Laundry. Why not? So I looked it up, and it was there for several years. It was actually a chain. They were from San Francisco, and they were here. And I looked up the ownership of the property, and it said the Noguchi family, a Japanese family. And I thought, So I talked to Sue Ellen Chang at the Chinese American Museum. I talked to several others at the Japanese American Museum, and they said, well, the Chinese were not allowed to own land at that time, but the Japanese could at that time. Later, that was rescinded later, of course. But the point is this, is that I excited them so much because we have the Chinese American community and the Japanese American community in downtown LA actually having a little finger, a little bit a part of the beginnings of the film industry in Los Angeles. I thought that was kind of neat. This is one of the oldest, rarest shots you will ever see, a holy grail, showing you the set outside there in the drying yard. And that's the Selig dog right there. That's their mascot. Next. And so this was the beginning of filmmaking in downtown LA. So here we have the Biograph Studio. Remember I showed you Griffith standing there with some tents? Well, it developed to a larger studio, and other companies started using it. So I have here written down between 1914 and 1916, independent companies were using it, including Thomas Ince of the Triangle Productions. And Thomas Ince is one of the most important figures in the early days of the studio development. And he was the one that started the Inceville. In other words, he took over Bison Film Company, moved it out to Santa Ynez Canyon in 1911, which is today where Pacific Coast Highway and Sunset Boulevard meet. Where Gladstone's is where the Inceville studio was. And then in 1915, Harry Culver, who was just developing Culver City at the time, wanted an economic base to start his city. So he thought the film industry would be his economic base. And that was what happened. And Thomas Ince was the first studio to open up in Culver City in 1915, which today is Sony Studios on Washington Boulevard. But in between, his other studio, which he wanted to build in 1917, 1918, down the block, which today is the Culver Studios, it's all Ince related. Ince needed to continue productions while the studios were being built. So he took over the old Biograph studio, as you see right here, in downtown at Pico and Georgia Street, which is where the LA Convention Center is now. And they were making films there for a while until his new studios were ready in Culver City. Next. Now here we have this is the Calum Signal Film Company. Now Helen Holmes and Helen Gibson were the first of the Signal Company to do these action pictures. Remember I showed you Ruth Rowland? She was doing railroad pictures too. Well, there were the three of them. There was Ruth Rowland, Helen Gibson, later married to Hoot Gibson, the Western star, and Helen Holmes. Now, these women were daring women. I mean, they were something. They were equestrians. They loved cars. They loved to drive cars. Ruth Rowland learned how to fly planes, and they all utilized cars, planes, and trains in their films, and no special effects. This is really Helen Holmes hanging up there over the trestle there and ready to jump onto the train, a moving train, I might add. On the bottom picture, it shows her at the Signal Film Company, which was located right across the street from the Southwest Museum on Pasadena Avenue. And those are the trains they rented, because if you know anything about railroading coming from downtown LA, they go right through, right up in the corridor there of Highland Park, you know, and into Glendale and all. And so that's where the studio was. And you see two big locomotives over there where they would film on. So you see the film industry, which is just developing, just getting going in Los Angeles, is utilizing historical film locations, historic parts of LA, and also utilizing the railroads and the trolley cars in doing all of this. Next. There it is. There's my company. That's the Bison Film Company, the second company to come to LA in 1909. This is their first anniversary shot in 1910 at their Edendale studio at 1712 Glendale Boulevard. So some of you might know that address. Today it is Public Storage on Glendale Boulevard and Jack in the Box. Yes, Hollywood Heritage. We put two plaques on the big concrete building that's there for public storage. If the gates open, you go and take a look at the plaques. But that is the first concrete stage. That's actually a movie stage built by Mack Sennett Keystone Company in 1915, and which still exists and is being used for storage. But here they are. That's Princess Redwing on the left and James Young Deere on the right, wearing her handmade beaded Sioux costuming. And they became known in New York for this. That's why they were hired by the New York Motion Picture Film Company in New York City in 1908. And that's Charles Bauman sitting on the front there holding his hat. He's the head of the company. And on the left, the other man in the suit is Fred Balshofer. He was the production manager, director, and all this. And I credit him with being the first to start B Westerns, which I'll explain later. But the B Western is not a feature Western. It is like a formula Western, which every studio had eventually all the way up into the 60s, in which that's where a lot of bread and butter money came in for the studio to keep it going. And so what was one of the symbols of a B Western? It was a white horse, right? Hopalong Cassidy, remember Silver? And other white horses, there were a whole bunch of them. Well, he bought the first white horse called Snowball in 1910, I think it was. And Art Accord, who's in this picture, was one of the first Western stars out here. He rode the white horse, and that began the beginning of the tradition of B Westerns, which of course was Roy Rogers and Hopalong Cassidy and Charles Starrett and a host of other ones. Next. Now there on the bottom is the first permanently built studio in Los Angeles, the Selig Polyscope Company at 1845 Glendale Boulevard. In those days, it was called Alessandro Street. The name Alessandro kind of ring a bell to any of you? Yes, it's Helen Hunt Jackson's character in Ramona. The Ramona story caught hold, and that was typical of the history of the Rancho period, the early days of the missions and Los Angeles, where the films took hold of this. And of course, Charles Lummis was instrumental in having the Selig studio designed as the San Gabriel mission, as you can see there, including a bell tower. And this is a super rare photo, of course, showing it in 1910. Up above, you see the trolleys already going through the corridor. This was the Edendale corridor, which is from Echo Park, Sunset Boulevard, leading up into Glendale. Of course, that's where the Glendale Freeway, the 2 comes and feeds into south, into the Glendale Boulevard, and then leading into, of course, Alvarado Street, etc. So, wow, wow, wow. You see, all of this, when I lived with all this, but I never realized all this until you break it down, as I keep telling you. Next. There it is. That's Edendale. This is in 1913, I think. No, 1915, excuse me. And down below, you see some big buildings down there. And you see a white roof building. That is the building I was just telling you about, which is public storage. That was the first sound stage. It wasn't sound, remember. It kept out sound. It was an enclosed stage in 1915. Remember, sound pictures actually started in 1898, but it was a novelty. I mean, nobody was making sound pictures really until 1928. So a few years later, not that much longer later though. But anyway, that stage down there is the public storage, and right in front of it is Jack in the Box. And that is the Keystone Studio, which before that was the Bison Film Company studio, which was a little horse ranch there, owned by the Hornbeck family. And William Hornbeck, good friend of mine at the time, was a kid. His parents lived there, and he was riding horses. And when the Keystone Company later came in, the Bison first, then Keystone, 1912, he became he was sweeping the editing rooms. He later became an Academy Award-winning film editor. I'm telling you, the real history and film history is so intertwined, and it's so much fun to know this. Next. Now, we're talking about East Hollywood now. And this is the Griffith Fine Arts Studio at Sunset and Hollywood Boulevard, where it meets and where Virgil is. It's a Vaughn's Market, I believe it's a Vaughn's Market today. But this is where, of course, the early days, the Kinemacolor Company came there first in 1911 from New York, making color films in 1911. And then after that, it became the Griffith Studio with it was called Majestic and Reliance, and then Griffith, the Fine Arts Studio of D.W. Griffith, where he made The Birth of a Nation, of course, and Intolerance. Below are the sets from Intolerance. And you see them there, that's a side view. But that is depicting Babylon, of ancient Babylon, with the giant elephants. And guess who was one of the designers of the Hollywood Highland project? My friend Eugene Hilche and myself, Marc Wanamaker. Remember the big elephants we had there? They're gone now, by the way. Why are they gone? They're gone because nobody knows or cares about the early days of the film industry. And nobody cared about the Babylon sets of D.W. Griffith being there. And now if you go there now, it's just sanitized. There's nothing there. It's just the same structure. But you see, I try to bring the theme of the iconic grandeur films of the early teens, which made Hollywood grow what it is today. And but it's forgotten already. In my own lifetime, this is forgotten of what I did there at Hollywood and Highland. Next. That's what I'm talking about. See what I mean? You see the inspiration for the Hollywood Highland motif? See that big back wall there, the Babylonian wall? That's that wall that still exists now. And you used to go there and take pictures of the Hollywood sign from it. And they ran out of money while they were making the Hollywood Highland project. So we only got 2 elephants on the right side near the wall. That's what was there all these years until they removed all that. So the reason I'm showing you this is that this is symbolic, this set, the film Intolerance, of the grandeur of Hollywood publicity all around the world, that this was made in Hollywood. By the way, that's not a miniature. You see the people down there? You see the 120, I think it was 135 feet high, these sets. They stood for 5 years until the city of LA made them take it down because they were falling down. It could be a hazard, of course. And to this day, it's strange. I cannot find any costuming, props, or hardly anything existing from this set. And they had like 5,000 people working there and 10,000 costumes and everything. It's all gone. It's just disappeared in into thin air, which is typical of Hollywood and the studios. Next. Now we get into the development of all this real estate in Hollywood. Now, real estate has a lot to do with everything. It had to do with the development of Los Angeles. It had to do with the development of the film industry in Los Angeles, like Harry Culver, for example, and Studio City, which was started by studio people. So this intertwining of real estate, development, transportation, It's all intertwined here. As you can see that down below there, as you can see that shot, that's the William Fox studio. This is this shot was taken in 1921, and they arrived there in 1915. And that is Western Avenue south from Sunset Boulevard, right in the bottom of the picture. It's amazing, the development, isn't it? And just think about it. We're in 2021. All this is just 100 years. If you think about it, it's just a little over 100 years. That's nothing. My mother passed away at 98. So you see the context of this. This is fast. The development of LA starting in the teens and leading up to now is very fast. Up until that time, very slow. Next. Now, the first studio in Hollywood was the Nestor Film Company. It came there in 1911 from Bayonne, New Jersey. The top shot shows them there in 1913. Al Christie and the Horsley brothers were the ones that brought them here. And they made Westerns, of course. And where did they make them? At the Providencia Rancho, of course, out in the valley there, as I explained, where Universal later took over there. And this is the northwest corner, which is today Columbia Square, which I'm proud to say Hollywood Heritage. We helped save this, Columbia Square. They wanted to demolish it, of course, but we stepped in, and what you see there now today is what we saved. We saved most of it. Most of it's there. Down below is when Al Christie took it over. Al Christie made his comedies there for quite a while. This is a shot below that was there about 1937, 29 I have. And it was demolished in 1937 to make way for the Columbia Square. So you see the studios, real estate, landmarks, transportation system, again, being intertwined in history. Next. Now there's an aerial shot showing you this. Now, right in the middle is the intersection of Gower and Sunset Street. Gower Street's going to the right and Sunset right in the middle. To your left, way over there, you see a big empty lot and you see some trees. That's Vine Street, and that was where the Paramount famous Players Lasky studio used to be. This is in 1926 because they moved from Hollywood to where they are today. Melrose Avenue, Van Ness, and Gower Street, that area. But look at that empty lots. They took all the stages away and everything away. Now, right in the middle is the Christie Studio. And there's the Christie Studio right there, which later became Columbia Square. Now, right to the left of that, you see a big building there, a big tall building. That's the telephone building. It's still there. And right in front of it is an empty lot. That used to be the beginnings of Universal Studios, Century Comedy Companies, LKO, Learman Comedy Companies, and it all burned down in 1926, right around this time. So today it's called Gower Gulch Shopping Center today. And who helped name it Gower Gulch Shopping Center? Me. Why? Because there's nobody else to be an advocate for the history of all this. It's just me all the time. And unfortunately, I'm trying to get this out to other people to be excited about the film history and Los Angeles history being intertwined. Right below is Columbia Studios. It became Columbia Studios. That's Poverty Row, Beechwood Drive there. And now it's the Sunset Gower Studios today. Next. Right, remember I just told you where it burned down where early Universal was, Century, etc. This was the Century Comedy Company at Gower and Sunset. This is the southeast corner. And look at the sets they used to have there to do comedies and dramas and whatever. That's early Hollywood stuff you're looking at. Next. This is the beginnings of Columbia. I just showed you the aerial shot of Columbia there. That's Gower Street there. And right below is how the name Poverty Row came to be and Gower Gulch, because those are cowboys standing there in 1937 at the southeast corner of Gower and Sunset. What are they waiting for? Jobs, Western jobs. They have their horses parked somewhere nearby. And when they get a job, they go on location. Where do they go? All to all those ranches where they'd be working. So one of these, one year in 1940, I think it was, one of the cowboys shot another cowboy in the back there. And that's known as dry gulching. That means killing somebody in his back, shooting him in his back, by surprise. That's why the name Gower Gulch comes from. And this is the only shot I ever found in 50 years of looking, showing you the Poverty Row Cowboys of Gower Gulch. Next. Now, I told you about the Lasky Feature Plate Company coming out to California. They use the San Fernando Valley. They use the trucks, of course, to take a lot of the equipment. And in the truck is Princess Redwing, yes, from the Bison Film Company. They all knew each other, the whole Hollywood colony. That's what they call it, a colony. Everybody knew each other. Everybody helped each other. And that's Cecil B. DeMille sitting there, right there on the bottom left. And Dustin Farnham, who is the star. And on the top, you'll see you see an Indian there, not with the headdress, without the headdress. And that is, hold on. I'll remember. But he was one of the earliest Black actors in Hollywood. I'll think of his name in a minute. And he started the Lincoln Motion Picture Company in Los Angeles, the first Black company in LA. They started in South Central, but they actually had a studio near Uni High in Sawtelle for a while. And I'll think of his name in a few minutes. Oh, did I put it down? I write it here. So awful. No, I didn't put it down, but Cecil B. DeMille. This is the first feature film length made in Hollywood. It's called The Squaw Man. They made it all over. They made it in San Pedro. They shot all over town, including they shot at the old a mansion at Western Avenue and Adams Boulevard, which I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but it looks like an English mansion. And down below is the old barn, and that is the Lasky DeMille barn, because when they came there, it was the Northrop barn of the Northrop farms and ranches there. And the Jacob Stern family, he was one of the developers of Riverside. He took over most of the land right there at Vine Street in Hollywood. And this was an old horse barn that was made into a studio. And that is the same place, which is today called the Hollywood Heritage Museum, which I'm a part of. And I actually personally, this was in 1926, moved to Paramount Studio back lot, became part of the Virginia City set. Yes, a real horse barn from old turn of the century Hollywood was used in movies, of course. And then later it was saved. And later now it was put across from the Hollywood Bowl, which is today the Hollywood Heritage Museum. I personally walked that barn there in the middle of the night down Hollywood Boulevard and up Highland, and we set it in place. So if you haven't been there, visit us. We're there Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, I believe, from 12 to 4. So you must see it. It's a history of early Hollywood and filmmaking in Hollywood. Next. This is, of course, a shot of the Melrose and Gower Street, looking northeast. And this is, of course, the RKO and Paramount Studios, which originally was interesting information. You can see a little bit about, right above it, the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, as it's named today. It was called the Hollywood Cemetery. Would you believe it was established there in 1899? It's one of the oldest cemeteries in town, right in the whole heart of Hollywood. And the lower portion that you see where all the studio is, that was part of the Hollywood Cemetery. But they didn't need all the land. Now they do, I can tell you that. But in those days, the studios purchased this land, first leased it, and then purchased it from the Hollywood Cemetery Association. Next. Now we have, remember I told you when Universal went out to the Providencia Rancho? Well, Providencia Rancho, I told you, is Forest Lawn today, but they couldn't stay there. Remember I told you that? So they had to move. So where did they move? They bought 3 ranches east of Barham Boulevard, fronting on Lancashire, which was the Taylor Ranch, and I forgot the other names. And another interesting little tidbit, Silsby Spalding and Burton Green of Beverly Hills history, right? They formed Beverly Hills. Get this, they owned one of these ranches. So some of the money that was paid by Universal to them helped to finance Beverly Hills. Isn't that interesting if you think about all this? But look at this. This is looking east toward Barham Boulevard and the Hollywood Hills there. And that's the back lot of early Universal. Isn't that amazing? Next. And this is the first studio tours, 1916. They started in 1915. That is a pavilion above the stage. You see all the people up there. They sold sandwiches, and later when Carl Laemmle in the 20s had an egg ranch over there for some of his relatives, they sold hard-boiled eggs too that you could eat. But this is an actual film being shot. That's Harry Carey, a famous stage star, became a Western star in the middle. And that's how they made the films. No sound. It was made on open stages, just like this. Of course, Westerns. That was the big deal. Remember, above everyone in LA was Western filmmaking. Next. And there's a shot of it looking now already in 1932, looking east. And it really was a city. You know what I mean? If you really think about it, all the studios were little cities. They had their own police forces. They had their own medical facilities and whatever. I mean, thousands and thousands of people came to work there every day. And and the LA River is right to the left. And let me tell you, the LA River, as I told you in the early days, was really a cesspool for a while until they cleaned it up a little bit. But they eventually, remember, it was always flooding. The LA River was always flooding and ruined the back lots of many of the studios like Warner's and Universal, which were right on the river. So that's why I think it was some of you might correct me, it was 50 or 51 is when they started to encase them in cement. Next. Now back to Hollywood. This is West Hollywood now. You're looking at Santa Monica Boulevard on your left, and then you see a little road right in the top part of the picture. That's La Brea, Santa Monica and La Brea. And this is the early Pickford Fairbanks studio, 7200 Santa Monica Boulevard. It started out as another studio, but Mary Pickford and Doug Fairbanks needed their own studio by 1922 and purchased it. And the first film that Doug made there was Robin Hood. Those are the Robin Hood sets that you see there that stood about 100 feet, by the way, high, very high. And that's a big stage below. Remember, they're not sound stages. They call them dark stages. They could use lighting in them for controlled circumstances. And right below that is another studio called the King Vidor Studio. And Mr. Vidor, of course, later became the famous director in later years, you know, of Duel in the Sun and all that. Well, that was his little studio. It became the principal picture studio, Saul Lesser, became Educational Studio, Grand National Studio, and Ziv Television Studios. You see how all this developed. So right on Santa Monica Boulevard, which is Route 66, is the rail lines. It was railroad and PE lines, Pacific Electric lines. You could roll freight down there. By the way, I remember I grew up in West Hollywood, and I remember 1965, I think it was the last freight train. It wasn't a whole train, it was just the locomotive, which kept running up and down Santa Monica Boulevard until it ended. Next. This is Sherman, California, West Hollywood. This is known for the famous, of course, the car barns, the junction. This was the major junction which would take you from Hollywood, and then you take this junction all the way to Santa Monica or other parts of LA from here. And it's a very important yard. Today, it is the Metro buses and, of course, the sheriff station of West Hollywood. Next. And now we go to the east, to the development of Westwood. I did a book on Westwood, right next to Beverly Hills. And if you know anything about the development of Westwood, it's the Wolfskill family. Yes, the Wolfskills of the old Rancho days. And of course, the Jans family, the developers of the San Fernando Valley and other parts of LA. And they merged with their families, merged through marriage. And they are the ones that developed the Wolfskill property, which was the Rancho Buenos Aires, which is the Rancho, of course, of Westwood. And the first major film company to purchase a big chunk of land there was the Fox Film Company, which was located, remember I showed you a picture at Western Avenue and Sunset? Well, they purchased a big vertical section there, you know, that big horizontal section at the left first, and later purchased the oil fields, which were at the right. And Beverly Hills is right to your right. Right there is Beverly Hills. And you see oil, yes, oil all over the place. And this was, of course, one of the most important new developments of Movietone Studio, Fox Movietone, which was the first permanently built sound studio in LA, in which today, of course, is the Fox Studio today as we know it. Next. And by the way, the Santa Monica rail lines ran right by it, of course. And now we have Culver City. On your left is Culver Boulevard. Yes, P&E. I keep saying P&E. PE, Pacific Electric, and the rail lines there. And that's Washington Boulevard on the right. And of course, Harry Culver developed, as I explained earlier, his city based on the movie industry and transportation, bringing everybody coming there and going from his new city. And that's today the Sony studio right there. That's MGM. Isn't that incredible? It's a whole city in itself. Yes, Wizard of Oz and all this was made there. Not Gone with the Wind, though. That was made down further at the Culver studio. Next. You got it. Now, right nearby the Culver City is the, what's it called down that area? It's right off of Robertson. There, forgot the name of it right offhand, but it doesn't matter. But that's Hal Roach had a little ranch there, Beverlywood, that's it. And right off of Robertson Boulevard, and there were no houses or developments there yet. It was open land with trees, and he had his his Hal Roach studio ranch there. And there's a shot of the R gang, and guess what they're riding on? They're riding on their own locomotive, because railroads and trolley cars was in people's minds every day. What can I say? It's the lifeblood of the city of LA was this transportation system. So of course they're featured in films and comedies and dramas and action films and everything to this day. Next. That is the Thomason studio that, remember, he moved from where the Sony studio is in 1918. He opened up his own studio today, and you can see it there. He died in 1924. Cecil B. DeMille, his best friend, purchased it with the help of Pathé Company of France, and that became the Cecil B. DeMille studio, where he made the King of Kings. And because he was with Pathé, he was there with them from 1925 to 1928 when Cecil B. DeMille went over to MGM studio. So Pathé merged RKO Studio of Hollywood and Pathé and became the RKO Pathé Studios of Culver City. And this is where Gone with the Wind was made, King Kong, Citizen Kane, and other great RKO films were made at the now known as the Culver Studio today. Next. And there's the front of it. That's the famous Mount Vernon styled front of the Thomason studio. And you might have seen this in the Selznick, because David O. Selznick took it over as the Selznick International Studios. So you see that at the beginning. So people get confused that was Terra in Gone with the Wind. No, it's not Terra, it's Mount Vernon. Terra was built on the 40-acre back lot, which was behind the studio, right on La Bayona Creek. Next. Now Innsville. Back to Thomas Ince again. Remember I told you he was all the way at Pacific Coast Highway and Sunset Boulevard. That's what you're looking at. You're looking due south towards Santa Monica. And I think the big market, I forgot what market that is. Some of you might know, remember, is right in the middle there. And the gas station right on the bottom left. And on the hill there, we see all those buildings. That's all the apartment houses, the Centinez apartment complex there. And this is the beginnings of the filmmaking, you might say, in Santa Monica area, making real American Indian pictures about Indian stories and Westerns. There was the Bison Company first, and Bronco Film Company, and then KB Westerns and other Westerns here. And this is where William S. Hart was born, because William S. Hart was a stage actor from New York who actually lived among the Sioux Indians because his father was a trader and learned the language and learned the sign language like Tim McCoy did. And when Thomas Ince found out about that, he said, "You have to be a Westerner." And he said, "I don't like horses particularly." But you know, he found him a horse that was smaller than him. It's true, he was 6 foot something. He found Fritz the horse, which was William S. Hart's beloved horse. And that all this was developed here at Innsville. Innsville eventually changed hands a few times, and it burned several times. And by 1935, nothing was there. And that was the end of the history of this part of the. Oh yeah, one thing I have to explain. That's right. I'm into cowgirls now. The history of cowgirls in films, and they all came from the Wild West shows. So when the Miller Brothers 101 Wild West show was wintering in Santa Monica and Venice, California, they were rented by Thomas Ince, and I actually found the testimony of Jane Bernuti. She was one of the early cowgirl writers and trick writers from the Miller Brothers. She was with Buffalo Bill as well. She got a job with Ince. So where did they stay? They stayed in the St. Mark's Hotel in Venice. And guess what? They took a stagecoach. This is 1910. A stagecoach 5 miles from Venice, from Windward Avenue, all the way here to Innsville every day until they built facilities for people to live here at Innsville. I actually have her testimony, and I have pictures of her here at Innsville in 1910. I mean, amazing discovery. Next. Now, of course, we have the Southern Pacific was using, and the Union Pacific was utilized by all these different film companies. That is Buck Jones. He was one of my B Western stars, and he did all kinds of other pictures as well. They all did their own stunts. So the studios rented trains. You follow me? And they went to all these locations where they rent all this, and they would have the track cleared for filmmaking for half a day. Next. And of course, downtown, we have I love this shot. I mean, this is Laurel and Hardy on a car, and the two Pacific Electric cars crushed them in between their cars with a special collapsing automobile, of course, and for Hog Wild. But this is Hoover Street right next to USC. And they shot at USC, they shot all around USC, they shot at LA City College, which later became UCLA. And when UCLA moved out to Westwood, they shot at UCLA. In other words, all the schools, elementary to universities and whatever, were all used by the film industry and all connected by the transportation system. Next. Now here, back out to Chatsworth, the Pioneer Zephyr train, the Silver Streak, which was a real train at the time, which was the newest modern thing of the 1930s that anyone could ever imagine. They premiered it in this film called Silver Streak to publicize the Silver Streak and the Zephyr and movies and the locations and Los Angeles. See how this publicity has always been working in this. Next. And this train was moved out, was actually the Virginia and Truckee locomotive number 22 was actually trucked out to Calabasas, and with 2 cranes lowered it down there, where they made, of course, Duel in the Sun. So the famous scenes you see there with the train and everything was right there. It's now a park. It was for a while it was known as the Amundsen Ranch, and now it's part of the Park Service there, and it's hiking trails and all this stuff. Also, what else was made out there was Charge of the Light Brigade and Gunga Din and other things were made at this ranch. Next. Now, at the Hell Road Studio, they created on one of their stages a permanent railroad set. So this is a replica sections of the Pennsylvania Railroad, Broadway Limited. They actually had the plans that was given to them. I have those plans. And they actually redesigned them and built them right on the stage. And this was rented by everyone in Hollywood when they needed the interiors, exteriors of a railroad train, and my passenger car. Next. So look at that. That is an actual reproduction from the plans with the furniture and everything gotten by the railroad companies. And this is where they would shoot, right at the Hell Road Studio there. Next. Now, over at the studio started to need to buy trains. They needed to own their own if they had room for them. But at Paramount, they had no room. So they owned some trains and they had them stored in different places. But for Whispering Smith, which the story Whispering Smith with Alan Ladd is basically about a railroad detective. Okay, that's what a Whispering Smith is a railroad detective. But look at this. They put a locomotive and a tender and a bunch of other things on the back lot of Paramount. And if you know Paramount today, there's no room there. This is where the B tank is today, where the big backing is, right in the middle of the studio. It's amazing how they could do this. The logistics of bringing it and shooting it and everything on such a small place is amazing. Next. This is my favorite picture, as you can see. I actually have this here in my house, right behind me. And this is Virginia and Truckee locomotive number 11, used by MGM for the Tall Target, starring Dick Powell in 1951. But if you look closely, you'll see the camera crew is on top of the cab. And you see all that black smoke coming out. Well, normally trains do not generate that kind of smoke. What they did was they seeded the locomotive with a, I forgot what they seeded it with, but makes a nice black smoke because it's dramatic, isn't it? Next. Now, well, let's go way back. This is Metro comedian Buster Keaton in 1923 for Our Hospitality. Keaton posed with his father Joe and his son Buster. Now, in front of the early rocket locomotive that was used in the film. The film was shot at the Metro studio in Cahuenga Boulevard and on location at Truckee. But the rocket is one of the very first locomotives ever built in the early 19th century. And one of the film companies actually used the real rocket, but the museum that had it said, no, this is you can't use it. So Buster Keaton, Metro made one. They made a replica from the original plans of the original rocket, and it appeared in the film, Our Hospitality. Next. Now, publicity again. Here we go. During the years, the film companies made The Iron Horse, all about the meeting of the rails and about the beginning of the railroading, of course, in the United States, and Union Pacific, all these films made about the early days of railroading. So for The Iron Horse, Sid Grauman of the Egyptian Theater, which just had opened earlier the year before, decided he will make a big splash with the opening of The Iron Horse. So what he did was he contacted the museum, the University of Stanford, which had this locomotive, the original Leland Stanford locomotive number 1, which today, by the way, is in the Railroad Museum in Sacramento, the California State Railroad Museum, beautifully restored. There's number 1, this one. And so what they did was they put it on a flatbed, took it down from Stanford down to Sherman, California, to the rail yards I just showed you. And then they put it on another Pacific Electric flatbed, pushed by a Pacific Electric tender, and pushed it in front of Hollywood Boulevard, in front of the theater, and with a crane lowered it into the forecourt. And then they brought some of the real Cheyenne Indians that were used in the film and posed them on it for the publicity. Wow. If that isn't showmanship, I don't know what is. Next. Now here is the making of DeMille's Union Pacific meeting of the rails in Utah. And guess where this was shot? It was shot in Canoga Park in the San Fernando Valley, which doubled for the Golden Spike ceremony in 1869 at Promontory Point in Utah. Yes, the San Fernando Valley again, doubling for real history. Next. Now, all the studios needed ranches. Now, Universal already had a built-in ranch built on their back lot, but other studios did not, like Paramount, for example. Paramount they started using the old Bison Providencia Rancho. It was later known as the Lasky Ranch, which is, again, to remind you, Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills. Then RKO had to build their ranch out in Encino at Burbank Boulevard and Louise, around that area. And then Paramount later purchased another ranch in Agoura, which I am the park ranger for. And we have filmings out there. I mean, we have filming there, but we have different programs. But our western town was burned down in the Woolsey fire. So we're rebuilding our western town there. And by next year, I hope maybe it'll be done. But anyway, this is the RKO Ranch. And you can see here they replicated train stations of the 19th century. They could do whatever they wanted. But the connection here is that the Southern Pacific ran through the San Fernando Valley early on for the farms to take their crops and everything. And so RKO Ranch was built right on a spur. They put a spur in so you could bring a train right up from downtown LA, right into the valley through Cahuenga Pass or through the Glendale Pass, and then right into the valley. And right there, you could take the train right off and into the RKO Ranch. Next. Now, special effects. Remember, I told you about the the Hal Roach set. Well, other studios had other pieces of trains that they would bring to the studio. And that screen in the back, there's a rear projection screen. And you can see pieces of real trains there. And that, yes, that is really Harpo Marx. Yes, it is. And he's lying there for the film they did called Go West. And they would run the film in the back like the trains are moving. So like he's the coupler of the train. Next. So this is a far shot showing the pieces of the train. That's Harpo Marx posing on the top tender there. And on the bottom is the cab of the train. And this is how they would make them. It was easier to make them this way than to actually what Ruth Rowland was doing, was hanging on a real train in a real outside location with no real protection. But this is how they made them in later years and how they still make them with special effects. Next. Now, this is a holy grail shot I found. This is Richard Dix here making a film, an actual location on near Occidental College on a Pacific Electric car. And you see the camera crew and the director, etc. Now, next shot is, look, I found these two shots in separate places over a period of years. This is the point of view from Richard Dix. Come on, it can't be a coincidence. That's what I'm always finding, these holy grail shots to illustrate. Yeah, look at that. Incredible. How could I find that? You see what I mean? That motivates me, keeps me motivated all the time. I'm going to find another holy grail. Next. Now, this is one of the funniest. You got to rent this film. Hot Water, Harold Lloyd. This shot was shot right on Hollywood Boulevard, just north of Sunset, where they kind of, remember where the Fine Arts Studio is, Sunset and Hollywood Boulevard meet, right there at Virgil Avenue in Hollywood, where the KCET studio was. Well, this is on Hollywood Boulevard, right near Vermont. And this is one of the funniest films ever made that shows them using a Pacific Electric car, because it takes place at Thanksgiving. And Harold Lloyd's wife tells him to go get all the groceries for Thanksgiving dinner and get a turkey. He gets to the store too late. All they had were live turkeys. So he decides, all right, I'll bring her a live turkey. So he's carrying all these packages, which you see here have fallen on the floor because everybody's going home for Thanksgiving dinner and there's no room on the trolley car. But guess what? He pushes his way in anyway. With a live turkey, it is the funniest thing you ever saw in your life. You must rent Hot Water. Next. Now, all the studios eventually purchased old rolling stock of old trolley and streetcars from the 19th century into the early 20th century. This is one of them on the back lot of Universal Studio. It shows this director, Fred Fleck, and cameraman John Stumore and Sidney Olcott posing on one of these early New York trolley cars from the 19th century, which they would use in films as a prop. Next. This is another one. This was, that's Mae West pointing at it there. Mae West poses with a vintage horse-drawn streetcar on the Paramount Studio back lot in Hollywood. This is the caption on the back of the picture. While working on She Done Him Wrong in 1933. The streetcar was owned by Paramount, which was purchased for film work in 1926. And it's a Brooklyn streetcar. Next. Now, I was one of the technical advisors on this film, Who Framed Roger Rabbit. So I brought my pictures of streetcars, trolley cars, etc. And there was a company that actually had one made up like this with tires. So, but what we had to do is when we filmed it on Cahuenga Boulevard in front of the, which is today the Red Studio, it was Renmar at the time, where they filmed the film, Who Framed Roger Rabbit. We duplicated it on Cahuenga Boulevard, and you could see tracks there. There were no tracks there in those days. When I was there in when was this? I forgot what the date was when we made this film. But anyway, we, with epoxy glue, we glued tracks onto Cahuenga Boulevard. And you see this scene in the film. Next. Now, this is the MGM studio back lot. Now, I'm showing you this because on the right is Culver Boulevard, which was Pacific Electric and, of course, Railroad. And right in the middle of the bottom part of this picture is the MGM train station, which was used in a million different films with Garbo and everybody else. And there is a spur that comes up from this Culver Boulevard transportation line right into the studio, just like at the RKO Ranch. Next. Now, backlots and ranches. Now, the Warner Brothers Railroad location, 1952, for this Carson City film was the Santa Susana Pass, which is a very important place where they filmed many films of Westerns mostly, but it was where the Virginia and Truckee locomotive, which was trucked down here, that's no pun intended, was rented. Now, right there is the Iverson Ranch. The Iverson Ranch was the biggest movie ranch in Chatsworth's history. It's half of it's developed now, half of it's part of the park. You see the beautiful rock formations when you go on the 118 freeway. That is the Iverson Ranch, and that's where they filmed all these. And of course, the railroad went right through this. Southern Pacific went right there, so they utilized it, of course, through the tunnel. Remember that tunnel shot I showed you, which went into the Simi Valley? Well, all of this is all interconnected. Next. Now, back to Universal. I'm showing you this as another one of these prop original early 19th century horse-drawn streetcars that was used. This is John Ford actually using one in 1920. Next. This is out at Paramount Ranch in 1938. They actually built right off of Cornell Road this wonderful San Francisco set. It was used for the film Wells Fargo in 1938. It's a replica of 19th century San Francisco. Yes, and look in the picture, you'll see horse-drawn trolley, horse-drawn streetcar, but you'll see the horse-drawn, what do you call them, carriages, buckboards, stagecoaches, everything, again, depicting transportation as, remember, it's Wells Fargo. So Wells Fargo relied on transportation, of course, stagecoaches, wagons, and trains, of course. So this is all connected. And the studio prop departments had all this in their departments. They have all this rolling stock. Next. That's the RKO Ranch I was just telling you about. That's at Louise. That's at the Burbank Boulevard. And right above there, you see like a white line. That's the LA River tributary. You know, there's different tributaries that went into the LA River. And that's where the railroad is right on the other side of it. And there was a spur that went right in to the ranch here. Down below on the right, you see some arches. That is a replica of Notre Dame for the Hunchback of Notre Dame film, starred Charles Laughton. Next. Again, this is at RKO Ranch, showing you wonderful different styles of train stations utilizing these old locomotives. Now, where do they get all these locomotives? Now, one of the major places they got them from is in Jamestown, which is up in Northern California, you know, in the gold country. Jamestown to this day has the Railroad Museum there. It is a place you must visit. If you've never visited it, it is incredible. I connected that to Hollywood because I consider it Hollywood of the North, where so many films were made at Jamestown. They would truck these, or flatbed these locomotives down to LA, and they had wonderful cars, and it still is in operation today. They're still being used and rented by film companies. You can go and see it. You can ride on one of the trains. It is a great attraction to visit. Jamestown, California. Next. Now, we're getting near the end here. Hollywood publicity rides the rails. Well, that's what I keep telling you, is that in this shot, for example, downtown at the Metropolitan Railway Station there, look at this. This is to publicize the film, which one is this? Oh, I have it written up above me. Why don't I just read what I wrote? 42nd Street. Dancers pose for publicity photos at the Santa Fe Redondo Station Yard in downtown LA, celebrating the premiere. The train, called the 42nd Street Special, travels from Hollywood to New York City, arriving in time for the opening of the Strand Theater. On the train were the Warner Brothers contract players. So you see, they're utilizing the trains not only for transportation, for publicity, or being stars in the films themselves. Next. Look at this publicity here on the left, Union Pacific. That's DeMille. Remember when they opened Union Station? This is some of the publicity. On the right, you see C. Gloria Swanson in 3 for Bedroom C, utilizing the Super Chief at the Astor Theater, of course, in New York. Next. Again, this is what I was telling you about, the grand opening of Union Station, utilizing the 19th century locomotive. Look at the tent. There were 30,000 people there that day that came out for the opening of Union Station. It was a major Los Angeles event. On the bottom picture shows DeMille with the mayor of the city at the time and the head of the Southern Pacific. George Raft is standing there, and etc. It was a great event. Next. Now, in the end of all this is that publicity, publicity, publicity. Always think about that. So here is Tom Mix with his wife and kid. Thomasina is his wife, and Victoria Ford, his wife. And here they are being publicized. They're going, I think they're going to New York on the California Limited at the Santa Fe La Grande Station in LA. So this would be in the newspaper. So then people would ask, I want to go on the California Limited. If it's good enough for Tom Mix, it's good enough for me. Next. Here is Joan Crawford arriving in Los Angeles at La Grande Station in downtown 1938. She traveled on the Santa Fe Super Chief from Chicago, because that's the main hub, to come to LA is from Chicago, from New York. And there she is. Next. And now the end of the train, the epilogue of this whole thing. At the ends of all the trains where the caboose is, or if they didn't have a caboose, they had a special lounge car. And at the end they call these, you see what it says Golden State, it's called a drum. It's a drum light. Actually, a light is in there. So you could always know what the back of the train is. So the film companies use the backs of these trains to end their films or for publicity or whatever. And that's Viola Dana there, posing while leaning on the drumhead for the publicity cameras as she departs LA in 1924 on the Southern Pacific Golden State train to promote her latest film, Along Came Ruth. I mean, that's the actual caption that I wrote that was on the back of the picture. Next. Now, here we go. Here on location at Santa Susana Pass, that's at the Iverson Ranch, Chatsworth, was the Southern Pacific observation, they call them observation cars, being used in the FBO production of Breed of the Sunset starring Bob Steele. So you see that how they utilize the actual train as part of a prop or the background, a set on location. It's all part of the charm of the films. Next. Yes, Charlie Chaplin. Charles Chaplin leaves Los Angeles from Union Pacific, Los Angeles Limited, Central Station, 1921. The train went to Chicago, where Chaplin would have changed trains from New York City. But you see, this is all the publicity. This is all cooked up by the railroad publicity people, chambers of commerces, the studio, publicity department, and the star themselves. Next. This is an amazing shot. The rear observation platform is used by many production units, sometimes cramming lights and a camera equipment with technicians. How did they get two giant lights, a camera and everything on the back of one observation platform? It's an amazing feat. Next. And this is I think the last shot. This is the Squawman Company. I told you about Cecil B. DeMille, the first feature film made in Hollywood. San Fernando Valley, 1913. The Squawman was the first 5-reel feature film produced in Hollywood area. Now, Cecil B. DeMille production starring Dustin Farnham and Red Wing, as I told you about Red Wing. But here they are at the, this is a gravel train out in Sun Valley. I mean, excuse me, Sun Valley, excuse me. I get Sunland and Sun Valley always mixed up, which was known as Roscoe at that time. It's the end of Vineland where San Fernando Road is.